This is CBN Newswatch.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm George Thomas. Today is Friday, October 3rd, and we begin this half hour with news in the Middle East. Israeli leaders reacting strongly to the terror attack on a British synagogue on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Meanwhile, the Israeli Navy stopped the pro-Hamas flotilla headed for Gaza, and Hamas seems to be backing away from President Trump's peace plan. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has more on our top story from Jerusalem.
As Jewish people prayed in synagogues around the world on Yom Kippur, the terrorist attack outside a synagogue in Manchester, UK, left 2 dead and 4 others seriously wounded. The police say one of the 2 men killed may have died from a police bullet.
Tonight, our first thoughts are with the families of those people who died, those injured, and those traumatized by this and horrific anti-Semitic attack on our Jewish friends and neighbors. We condemn it outright.
Following the ramming and stabbing attack, police immediately tightened security at synagogues throughout the country. British Jews felt such an attack was inevitable amidst increasing anti-Semitism in the UK. And Israeli leaders expressed their grief and said they have been warning about such attacks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement, Israel grieves with the Jewish community in the UK after the barbaric terror attack in Manchester. Our hearts are with the families of the murdered, and we pray for the swift recovery of the wounded. As I warned at the UN, weakness in the face of terrorism only brings more terrorism. Only strength and unity can defeat it. Israeli President Isaac Herzog revealed he had written a letter to British King Charles III a few days ago, warning of rising anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hatred in the UK, along with Australia and Canada. Here in the Middle East, off the coast of Israel and Gaza, the Israeli Navy intercepted dozens of ships in the pro-Palestinian flotilla coming from Europe. The Navy brought the activists to Israel on Yom Kippur for deportation. And while activists demonstrated against Israel around the world, Israeli police spokesman Dean Elsden walked viewers through one of the largest vessels in the flotilla.
And while we're processing this boat, there's one thing missing, guys. All this aid that they were supposed to bring into Gaza, which explains one thing to me, I'm sure it explains to you, that when we and multiple other countries offered them to take this aid and bring it to the Gazans, we could facilitate its safe arrival, they flat out rejected it. And now we know why, because it was never about bringing aid to Gazans, but it was all about the headlines and the social media followings.
Inside Gaza, the war continues as Israel is keeping up its attacks on Hamas, and the IDF said terror organizations in the Gaza Strip are continuing to try to sabotage aid distribution centers by launching projectiles at the sites. There are conflicting reports about whether or not Hamas intends to agree to President Trump's peace plan, but if they do not accept it, they would demand changes. But the U.S. and Israel reportedly won't negotiate. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Julie. Chris Mitchell is now with us from Jerusalem. Chris, what's the latest on Hamas's stance with regards to Trump's proposal for a ceasefire?
Well, right now, it doesn't seem to be exactly any specific decision. A senior Hamas official, George, says they're receiving the plan. They're beginning consultations. They have reservations about the plan, but will publish their position soon. And they say they have right as representatives of the quote-unquote resistance to express reservations, and they say a response will be given promptly. I think there's conflicting reports. There's one BBC report, George, that said the organization is expected to reject the plan, and Hamas refuses to disarm and sees the international force that's part of the plan as, quote, a new form of occupation. And also we're hearing, George, that some of the Arab and Muslim nations that sat down with President Trump last week at the UN, they're objecting to what they say were last-minute changes to the plan after Netanyahu met with President Trump at the White House. And those include the timetable about the IDF to withdraw, the area around the IDF that will occupy around Gaza, and the role of this new peacekeeping force. But regardless, we should know soon what they decide, because President Trump's timetable On Tuesday, he said about 3 or 4 days is almost up.
Yeah. On this issue of these flotilla, right, with all these boats heading for the Gaza Strip, news reports say the flotilla was carrying humanitarian aid. But what did the IDF find?
Well, as you saw, a police spokesman there went through the largest ship. They didn't find any humanitarian aid. They had been told that they could offload it to an Israeli port, Ashdod or Ashkelon. Actually, there were other countries that were saying, we'll take the aid and bring it to Gaza. But it seems like it was simply both a publicity stunt and a propaganda effort to demonize Israel in another attempt. And on social media, and it seems like it was probably likely very successful what they did to put Israel in a bad light, but they didn't find any humanitarian aid.
On this barbaric and terrorist attack in Manchester, England, how are the Israelis viewing this attack? Do they see this, I'm sure, as another example of rising anti-Semitism?
Yeah, and they see it as a major concern, George. As Julie's report said, the Prime Minister issued a statement. The President had sent a letter just days ago to the King of England warning about the anti-Semitism that's rising, not only in England, but around the Commonwealth. And that includes, Australia and countries like that. And indeed, not only in the Commonwealth, but around Europe. So among Jews here in Israel and around the Jewish world, an event like this literally sends shockwaves through them. Many people are wondering, is this the time to make Aliyah, to come here to Israel, being perhaps the only safe place that they believe will be a bulwark against this rising tide of anti-Semitism and terror attacks, not only in England, but around the world.
Chris, last 45 seconds. What do you have on today's Jerusalem Dateline, brother?
Well, an update on what's the latest. We also have an interview with Dinesh D'Souza. He's the producer and director of the new documentary called The Dragon's Prophecy about October 7th. We have a story with Hadar Shavit. She was a school teacher, happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. She was at that Nova Music Festival, and she survived. She tells us about that. Also a story called Rising from the Ashes, a story by our reporter Paul Petit, talking about how the Israel Antiquities Authority was actually brought in to have a unique role in actually identifying many of the remains of the people who were tragically killed on October 7th.
All right, terrific. Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell, thanks for your insights, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the days ahead. By the way, you can see the latest Jerusalem Dateline at 8 p.m. Eastern on the CBN News channel. You can also watch it on the CBN News app or on YouTube. Okay, folks, back here at home, lawmakers are in Washington. They remain deadlocked on the day 3 of the government shutdown as some federal employees risk facing permanent layoffs. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London brings us the story from our nation's capital.
As the Senate is expected to vote again on a funding bill today, President Trump calls the federal shutdown an unprecedented opportunity to downsize the government. In a meeting with Budget Director Russell Vought Thursday, Trump said the two would discuss which federal agencies would face temporary or permanent cuts.
I'm allowed to cut things that should have never been approved in the first place, and I will probably do that.
The talks happening on the heels of the president freezing about $18 billion in funding for New York City infrastructure projects and canceling another $8 billion for climate projects in 16 Democratic-leaning states. Still, with no sign of a spending agreement, many workers' livelihoods remain at stake as the Trump administration warns it could start firing federal employees before the weekend.
Hundreds of thousands of federal workers being home. I mean, it's not just some people who live paycheck to paycheck.
In an interview on Two-Way, political analyst Rachel Bade points to workers in essential fields like TSA, air traffic control, and national parks, all who could be required to show up without pay until the shutdown ends.
The pressure is just going to skyrocket on Democrats right now.
A partial shutdown started Wednesday when the fiscal year ended after a divided Congress failed to agree on a funding bill. Republicans want to pass a short-term bill that would maintain funding at existing levels until late November. But Democrats want that short-term funding to include extending Obamacare tax credits so that the health insurance premiums for millions of Americans won't go up.
Republicans have shut the government down because they don't want to provide health care to working class Americans.
Democrats are showing little sign of budging from their demand for concessions on health care. As conservatives work on plans to reforming health care, Senate Majority Leader John Thune told Politico he has had discussions with Democrats about those Obamacare subsidies. He says he is willing to come to the table on negotiations, but not until the government reopens under a spending plan that the House has already passed. Michelle London, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Michelle. Coming up, they're America's best idea, and yet their future could be in jeopardy. See why our national parks could be forced to close even as they're drawing record crowds. Welcome back to the broadcast. America's national parks are hosting record numbers of visitors. Tourists from across the nation and around the world come to experience natural wonders in all their beauty. Right now, the parks have limited services during the government shutdown, but overall, recent federal budget cuts and staff shortages have now put the future of our parks in jeopardy. CBN's Brody Carter takes us to Zion National Park for a closer look.
It's said the national parks are America's best idea. We're hiking the Narrows here at Zion, southern Utah. It serves roughly 5 million people every year. But friends of the park and former national park employees tell me that big budget cuts from Washington are threatening these national gems and could potentially lead to park closures.
Humans have navigated this canyon for centuries. First came the ancestral Pueblo and Paiute tribes. Then settlers from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Breathtaking. I mean, you see beauty that you've never seen before.
Efforts to protect this great temple of stone began in 1909 when it became Mukuntuweap National Monument. Renamed Zion by Mormon settlers, it received national park status in 1919.
We come here from Poland because we want to see your national parks.
As one of the system's most visited locations, second only to the Great Smoky Mountains, Zion has welcomed more than 100 million visitors. For rangers like Matthew Fink, wearing the iconic uniform is more than a job. It's a promise to protect this fragile resource and keep its visitors safe.
The mission of the National Park Service is to preserve and protect places like Zion for current and future generations. That's about as pure of a mission statement as I could imagine.
The promise bears more weight given that visitation has risen 80% over the last 15 years. That surge in foot traffic is now crashing into a wall of federal financial discipline. The Trump administration's first budget proposal would have slashed $1 billion from the National Park Service. While Congress didn't go that far, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill reduced the park budget by $267 million. Combined with a mandate to shrink the federal workforce, it's a 1-2 punch park advocates believe will push the system to a breaking point.
So since January, the National Park Service has lost about a quarter of its permanent workforce. So nearly 1 in 4 people are no longer in their jobs at the National Park Service. And this follows a decade of just decreased funding to the national parks at the same time that the parks have never been more popular. They reached a record 331 million recreational visits in 2024.
Cassidy Jones of the National Park Conservation Association speaks up for the park employees keeping quiet over fear of losing their jobs.
But this administration has been very clear that they do not want to talk about personnel issues. That's a directive that comes right from the Secretary of Interior's office. And so they're not commenting on the ways in which different tactics to shrink the federal workforce is affecting the Park Service's ability to do its job.
The near total hiring freeze has left roughly a quarter of Park Service jobs unfilled. Lack of funding for critical maintenance adds to an existing $22 billion backlog of repairs. And the pain goes beyond national parks to the service's 433 other sites, including monuments, battlefields, beaches, and historic landmarks.
So our role is to engage with local partners, the Park Service, and communities to stretch dollars as far as we can to fund critical projects, whether that's in education, conservation, search and rescue, or making sure that our park rangers have the resources and tools they need to do their jobs effectively.
For 96 years, Zion National Park Forever Project, a nonpartisan friends group, has worked to ensure a positive visitor experience. Donations alone, however, can't replace full-time federal workers. President Natalie Britt says lean rosters force hard trade-offs in key areas.
But as you have less and less people, there's 700 plus search and rescues in this park every year. There's a morale issue, right?
Yeah, you're good.
So when there's less people doing that, the impact to the public and the impact to our green and gray is certainly a challenge.
We generate $15 for every dollar we bring in. And we're only 1/15th of 1% of the entire national budget.
National parks are in Fred Fahrgren's blood. His father spent 2 decades as a Zion Ranger, giving Fred an education inside the park before he followed Dad's footsteps, serving 34 years himself.
For me, it's the place I grew up. It means a lot to me. Nowadays, it's hard to get people to come work for the National Park Service because we have housing problems. So I don't know where the Park Service can go unless there are additional funds provided.
Unfortunately, things could get worse. The Great American Outdoors Act, landmark legislation that's pumped billions into fixing the park system's aging infrastructure, is set to expire next year. Without congressional reauthorization, the $22 billion maintenance backlog will only grow.
My father was working as a ranger on the south rim of Grand Canyon when I was born.
Philip Bruick also served in the parks more than 3 decades. He fears more cuts could close or reduce access to those parks already struggling.
Now when you have parks that are 97, 98% personnel services, you don't have any money for overtime, you don't have money for supplies, you certainly don't have any money to repair something. And so I think Congress and the president go ahead with these kind of cuts. I think we may even see some parks closing down because they can't handle the management duties and responsibilities they have.
Back in Zion, the work continues, fueled by the mission to protect these places for future generations.
What I do believe is that the folks that do this job are so committed to being a force for good. You meet somebody in the green and gray, they are called by a bigger power to serve the public and to do the right thing.
Those wearing the uniform admit they can't do it alone. It will take Congress, communities, and individuals working together to help America's national parks thrive for generations to come.
The development of the national parks has proven to be one of the greatest treasures in America. Reporting in Zion National Park, Brody Carter, CBN News.
And welcome back to the broadcast. Devon Franklin is making waves over at Netflix with his latest film. He partnered up with Tyler Perry to bring the story of Ruth and Boaz to the small screen. And Gloria Estefan is celebrating 50 years in music. Ephraim Graham shares this and more in this week's top stories making headlines in the world of entertainment.
At number 4, love is in the air for this singer and actress.
Only Murders in the Building star Selena Gomez got hitched over the weekend to record producer and songwriter Benny Blanco. Gomez, who began her career as a Disney Channel star, is now the most followed woman on Instagram, where the couple shared their wedding photos. Among those in attendance, Only Murders co-stars Steve Martin and Martin Short. Also on the guest list, Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran.
I believe in timing, so I think it was nice. I've known him for so long, but so it built a friendship. Sweet.
It just feels like everything's easier.
At number 3, a few quick snapshots ahead of this week's opening of a first-of-its-kind Christian and Gospel Music Museum. Doors open this Friday in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. And Studio 5 is headed there to bring you even more up close and personal. At number 2, it's a musical milestone for a music legend.
Gloria, it's hard to believe, but you've been doing music now for 50 years. You're in this movie. You've got to play. How are you keeping that inner child alive?
I am the child. You know, I think being in music and
it just keeps you younger. And all my family, my grandmother, who's a big inspiration for me in this movie, was just one of those kind of people that never stopped playing, that was always creative, that was always looking forward and fun. And I have passed that on to my kids and to my grandsons.
At number 1.
Let me tell you a love story.
Movie makers Tyler Perry and Devon Franklin unite for their first joint project on Netflix, and it is number 1 in streams.
The pages of Scripture are inspiration for a new film streaming on Netflix this week. It is a modern take on the love story of Ruth and Boaz.
How long have you been singing?
My whole life.
Oh, what a beautiful voice you have.
So, what's his name? When do I meet him?
So, when did you first recognize this biblical story as a film?
Yeah, you know, it was actually a few years ago. I was in my season of single and had just, come out of divorce and was just trying to figure out life and was doing a sermon series on what it means, the power of being single. And I started studying the book of Ruth. And I was like, whoa, this has the elements of a movie. And I was like, I don't think there's ever been a movie version of this story, not a modern version.
No one has ever done anything this beautiful for me.
It's nice seeing this side of you.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
In Brussels, Belgium, more than 14,000 people came out to hear a gospel message from evangelist Franklin Graham. The Festival of Hope, organized by some 620 Belgian evangelical churches in collaboration with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, organizers call the cooperation of different ethnic churches a miracle of unity. A large crowd, a mixture of Christians and unbelievers, some who had never been to church before. The BGEA said many responded to the invitation to put their faith in Jesus Christ. Folks, that is it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our programs on the CBN News channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Or you can talk to us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, which is formerly known as Twitter. We hope you will join us again next time. From all of us here from the headquarters of the Christian Broadcasting Network, wish you a great day. Goodbye, and God bless.